Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Thriving Minds podcast with your host, Walter Parada, where we strive to provide you with empowering talks so you can live to thrive. I hope you find yourself in the right frame of mind, focusing on all the things within your control. All right, so today's episode, we're going to be talking about staying composed during adversity so you can rebound from it. The Stanley Cup Final 2024. So this past Stanley Cup Final was an incredible one. If you don't watch hockey, it's the championship series, and this time it was the Florida Panthers who made it to the Cup last year, but just came up short versus the Edmonton Oilers. It's a 7-game series, and first team to win 4 games wins the series. So that's how it works. Just like basketball, baseball. And early on, it looked like the Panthers were going to sweep the Oilers. The Panthers won the first 3 games, and it looked like the 4th game was just going to be a formality and them winning the cup. So a little bit of a background. The Florida Panthers just completed the 30th year in existence. They were formed in 1993. They made it to the Stanley Cup Final in 1996, but were swept that year by the Colorado Avalanche. Since then, and prior to the 2022 season, the Panthers had very little success. The Edmonton Oilers last appeared in the Cup in 2006, but came up short, with their most recent win back in 1990. But both teams had high expectations going into the year. The Oilers have what many people call 2 generational talents in Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid, and they're in their peak of their careers, so the window to capitalize on it is now. For the Oilers, they said it was cup or bust this year, that it's either an all or nothing scenario. Anything short of winning the cup is basically a lost season. So this added more pressure on themselves. The first game was a toss-up where either team could have won the game, and the Panthers looked like the tighter team. Their nerves were showing up, but they did handle it well. The difference was missed opportunities by the Oilers, while the Panthers capitalized on theirs. It's important to note that we're all going to face those times of being a nervous wreck, and it's not something that you just turn off or ignore and it just goes away, but you got to find a way to manage it. You got to work through it so you can execute, and that's exactly what the Florida Panthers did. It's about finding a way to relax and be calm, to not be overtaken by that nervous energy. For some, that nervousness can be interpreted as excitement. So a helpful way to see that high energy in a big moment is to see what is right in front of you as an opportunity where you're grateful for what you're about to get to do. Not so much on the end result, but on the process of what you're about to embark on. Where some of that nervous energy comes from is how close you are to something that you really want, and the thinking of falling short or making mistakes can be more prevalent. This is the thinking of what could happen that causes your focus to be pulled in so many different directions. But when you're focused on what's right in front of you, avoiding thinking too far ahead, you channel that high energy into executing at a high level. It's being present in the moment where all your energy is focused on what is within your control. Anything beyond that just throws you off and it becomes overwhelming. So in game 1 for the Panthers, after that first period, they were able to settle in. It's natural to think about the ramifications of what could happen, and sometimes all you need to do is take action, one thing at a time, that leads to conviction and builds that rhythm in the right direction. This then gets your nerves to subside and you can operate freely. Early on in the period, the goalie for the Panthers, Sergei Bobrovsky, he tried to clear the puck and turned it right over to the Oilers player. But Sergei was able to stay composed and block the shot. And this started to help settle things down. And maybe that's exactly what he needed. Just a little bit of that action to get his mind operating a little bit more freely. And then a few minutes after that, the Panthers were able to score the first goal. And this also helped to ease those nerves. They got their game and they were able to slow down the top Oilers players. And they ended up winning the game 3-0. Game 2 got a little ugly for the Oilers. The Panthers were able to frustrate them and they won 4-1. And teams that take a 2-0 lead in the series go on to win 91% of the time. In the post-game interview, Connor McDavid, who is considered the best hockey player and is the captain for the Edmonton Oilers, showed tremendous leadership and composure, just saying that this is another opportunity for the group to come together and dig their way out. And he said it in a very not too down voice, but not overly optimistic. While this might come off as player speak, just saying the right thing, it is important to say it and believe it. There's no need to dig a deeper hole than what you're already in. And many times, it is human nature to be self-destructive when we're feeling despaired. Game 3 seemed to be unraveling for the worse for the Oilers, as they were just making mental errors in a short period of time, eventually getting down 4-1. At this point, it just felt demoralizing. They either could fold it in and not give their best, or they can come out with everything they had. And that's exactly what they did. They threw whatever they could at the Panthers. So entering the third period, it was 4-1, and their Oilers were just relentless in getting the puck to the net, just shooting it and retrieving it, and just overwhelming the Panthers. Eventually, the Oilers scored and continued to fight back, scoring another one. So now it's 4-3. They're gaining momentum and they're breaking through, but they came up short. And now they're down 3-0 in the series. The Panthers are now just one win away from winning the Stanley Cup, their first ever in franchise history. So that was a big monumental moment for them. And teams that take a 3-0 lead in the playoffs go on to win 98% of the time, with an overall record of 206-4 all time. The last time a team was down 3-0 and win the Stanley Cup Final was in 1942, when the Toronto Maple Leafs came back to beat the Detroit Red Wings. So if you look at history, it just proves there's very little hope to get back into it. But if you're focused on history, maybe you could be focused on the wrong thing. So at this point, the thinking might be it's over, the Panthers were dominant, and now it's time to get ready for the season to be over. In the post-game interview, Connor McDavid was asked, how can they break through? And McDavid just says, in a very bit of a somber voice, I don't know, we haven't been able to figure them out, which is a great way to self-assess. But then he says, as the series goes on, they eventually figure out what to do. They got to just try different things. And he goes on to say, it's not over till it's over. They still got one more game and they're looking forward to it. In all of this, the head coach, Chris Knobloch of the Oilers, is just calm throughout, really even-keeled, saying that there's a lot of belief within the team that they can rebound from this, that they just need to keep pushing. Players are full of hope, and if anyone can do it, they can, he says. They already had some adversity early on in the season where the Oilers lost 10 of the first 13 games, and they were ranked second to last. So they were ranked 31st, and were being talked about not reaching the playoffs by early November. Eventually, the Oilers fired their coach as things just appeared dysfunctional, and Chris Knobloch took over. And the coaching staff that he has now, they've never worked before together, and somehow they struck the right notes to get this team to come together and pull off many impressive win streaks. Coach Knobloch said that a big part of the turnaround was breaking the season into parts. So instead of seeing 60 games left on the schedule, the season was broken up into 5 to 8 game segments so everyone can focus properly to digest what was going on. This helps to alleviate the pressure and just do what you can in the moment that you are in. On the other side, right after Game 3, Sam Bennett, one of the Florida Panthers players, was asked what has led them to being so dominant. And he says that either you have it or you don't. I thought that was a little bit off-putting, maybe where the focus was lacking a little bit, because that comment can be taken as you have a certain instinct or you don't. But if you go based on that, then it's just succumbing to genetics, that we're fixed and there's nothing you can do to improve yourself. This can lead to the thinking of your situation dictating how you think and how you act. It's not that you have a certain trait or not. It's just how much of it is already naturally developed, how much of it is already coming out naturally. But maybe he said that because he and the Panthers were feeling that this was their time and the way that they were playing was going to lead to winning one more game. So here comes Game 4 with the Stanley Cup in the building and the game in Edmonton. The Panthers players had many of their family members come up to Edmonton to be ready to celebrate with them if they won. But the end of practice before Game 4, one of the coaches for the Oilers addressed the entire team and tells them, listen guys, you're great, believe in yourself, and add some other encouraging words. A reporter says that was a significant moment because this coach usually doesn't talk to the team, and this probably resonated with them. What can be expected from closing out the series? The Panthers celebrating and the Oilers totally defeated? Well, the Oilers came out with a high sense of urgency and responded with an 8-1 victory in a truly dominating fashion. The desperation was channeled extremely well because they limited their mistakes and capitalized on their opportunities while also making changes in their lineup. But the first 3 games, the Oilers seemed like the looser team. It was just mental errors that caused them to come up short. Things really started to come together that could spark things so they can make a run and win another game. Connor McDavid was asked how he felt about the game, and in a very even-keeled manner says, it was a good game. Now we get the opportunity to play one more game. His focus on the right now showed a high level of maturity and leadership, and players will follow that. He was able to move past what already happened and wasn't thinking beyond the moment that he was in. It's amazing how well you operate being in this mental state. It really removes so many little distractions so you can use all of your energy on one singular thing. Was this a pivotal moment that is going to turn the series around? Or is it just inevitable that history is going to repeat itself? Well, it was a pivotal moment, and the Oilers responded in a tremendous fashion. But that's all it was. It was a moment in time that turned out favorably for them and not so much for the Panthers. What happened yesterday is not a guarantee that it's going to happen again. What affects the outcome is what you do right now, moment to moment. What consistently is done is what comes about. Anything beyond that limits what can be done. On the other end, were the Panthers players distracted and thinking too far ahead, winning and celebrating with their families? I'm sure that must have crept in their minds. Scheduling their family to come up diverts energy away from what they need to focus on. Things like where they're going to stay, getting tickets, how many of them, and knowing that everything is on the line can cause their minds to drift from what it takes to close out the final game. Could the success from the previous games make them feel the same was going to happen again? It's good to draw on accomplishments as a way to grow your confidence, but heavily relying on it, carving out the same path as before, can prove costly. Each challenge in front of us requires our full attention, but maybe that's what they needed to focus on the next practice so they can give their best the next game. Can the Panthers flush this loss and rebound from it, or is it going to linger? And all that's dependent on how they choose to respond. So now it's Game 5. The Panthers are up 3-1 in the series, and it was just one win for the Oilers and one loss for the Panthers. But now this next game, they're going to be in their arena, and maybe they can win the cup there. Maybe this is what each team needed to make it interesting. So here comes Game 5, and before you know it, the Oilers are up 3-0. And it looks like they're going to get another win, maybe even in dominant fashion. But the Panthers responded well. They were aggressive and scored. So this, kind of created momentum on their side. The Oilers then added another goal, and we're up 4-1. And this can be a bit deflating. But the Panthers again responded by scoring again and continued to claw their way back in the game. Eventually, they scored again to get within one, making a strong push to get the game tied, but they came up short. While the Panthers were able to avoid getting blown out, losing 2 in a row can be a little unsettling, but they fought back to make the game competitive. At least Game 5 was not a repeat of Game 4. They surely were focused on rebounding from the loss. So what's going on in the players' head on each side? And what both teams said was it was one game and it's time to focus on the next one. This can be perceived as bad news for the Panthers, as the Oilers now have the momentum to extend the series. So now the series is 3-2, Panthers are still up, right? So how does it feel when things are slipping from you? Probably nervous, doubting, hesitating, confused. That can lead to panic if unaware of how to manage the tide. This is something we all might find ourselves in, where stretches of things are going well and then stretches of things are going poorly, wondering, how did it get to this point? And what makes the difference in the long run is how composed you can be, because it's going to help regulate your emotions from leading the way and instead channel it to execute properly, to work your way out of things from spiraling for the worse. When things seem like it's deteriorating, you got to find a way to correct whatever you can, because when you do, it triggers that sense of, I can turn this around, or it can be done. It just starts by doing one good thing, and then another, and another. So Game 5 helped the Panthers from falling down that rabbit hole of thinking too far ahead, where they could be thinking about all the things right or wrong that can happen, and getting back to the fundamentals of going out there and playing fast and aggressive. Think less and just play your guts out. They now should be refocused as they'll be on the road in Game 6. And in Game 6, the Oilers took a 2-0 lead before the Panthers struck back with a score of their own. And in a very heads-up move, Chris Knoblauch challenges the goal for an offside call that was eventually overturned in the Oilers' favor. This must have been deflating for the Panthers, as that could have sparked them to get back in the game. It was a great call by Knoblauch to just challenge it, and it shows his confidence in his people, because they're the ones reviewing the goal, and they notified him, hey, you should challenge it. The risk is, if he loses the challenge, then the Oilers are down a player for 2 minutes, and obviously it gives the advantage to the Panthers. From a momentum perspective, this was crucial, as the Panthers were flat after this. The Oilers won the game 5-1, and now many are wondering if the Panthers are going to blow it. Negative things were being said, like the Panthers are on the verge of an epic collapse. To me, this seems a little harsh, as both teams played stretches of really strong hockey. And the captain for the Panthers, Alexander Barkov, was the one who scored on that offside goal that was negated. And he was asked in the post-game press conference what he thought of the call. And he responded with an impressive answer, saying that it was called offsides and I can't do anything about it. He goes on to mention that they had their chances later on, but they didn't capitalize on it. And that offsides call was not the reason why they lost the game. This just shows tremendous mental strength and leadership to move on from it so quickly. He understands that it's just best to move on to what's right in front of him instead of looking back to what could have happened. His ability to reset has been a big part of why they won so many crucial games to get to the Cup Final. The way he handled all this showed that he was more than ready to handle being on a 3-game losing streak in the Cup Final. But the narrative now is that the Oilers have all the momentum, and now it's inevitable they're going to win it. Many people on the outside, those not in the locker room, mention how the Panthers are doubting themselves, that they're a different team from how they started the series. Now with Game 7, it now means that the Oilers for the first time can win the Stanley Cup, while the Panthers are on their 4th try. It might seem that more pressure is on the Panthers because of how many times they've fallen short, but all of this is based on how you perceive it. McDavid was asked what Game 7 and winning the Stanley Cup means to his legacy, and he says he's not concerned about that because that's something for them to write. And this is such a great response. Both of the captains of each team showed their leadership quality and is a big reason why they led their teams to this position. Both teams experienced role reversals in the highs and lows, which led to an incredible Game 7. It was the best game of the series, and how fitting was that? The Panthers came out as the aggressors, controlling the puck early on, but the Oilers were able to weather that and settle in. The Panthers were the one who scored first, and then the Oilers struck back shortly after. The rest of the game, it was really tightly contested, and eventually the Panthers scored in the second period. And it remained like that 2-1 until the final 4 minutes. And this is when the Oilers had their best players, and they played that basically those last 4 minutes. And because of that, they were just completely exhausted. The final minute, they just looked totally spent, and the Panthers were able to hold them off to win their first Stanley Cup. It truly was a remarkable game and an even better series. From first looking like the Panthers are going to sweep them to then looking like the Oilers are going to complete the reverse sweep. Both teams showed an incredible amount of resilience, mental fortitude, and belief within themselves to turn things around. They were able to handle their emotions so well to navigate the rough and unsettling times. They were able to know how to handle the momentum in both directions. As I'm watching all of this unfold, it was really marvelous to see the way that the Oilers players and the coaches handled themselves with just such grace after each loss to be able to reset and get ready for the next practice and the next game. The way the Panthers players also mirrored that excellent way of handling what seems like situations spiraling out of control. It takes a lot of mental energy to manage those emotions and physically go out there and perform at their peak. And these two teams did just that. There were many opportunities for these players and coaches to deflect blame or to point others' fault during trying times, but they handled themselves with a high level of professionalism that's just so very admirable. Yeah, I'll remember who won the Stanley Cup in 2024, but I'll remember more the process of what happened in each game. The way that the teams believed in themselves and each other to take on what seemed like an unlikely hurdle to overcome, to be unwavering and steadfast in their pursuit. There's a reason why both these teams made it to the final, and it's not just luck, but a commitment to each other for a common goal, led by their coaches who showed excellence throughout. All the people involved went beyond what is physical and tapped into that mental side to propel them forward. The Panthers had an incredible run, especially how their season ended last year, losing the Stanley Cup Series 4-1. They battled many key injuries last year to pivotal players at important moments in the game. Matthew Tkachuk, who's one of the star players for the Florida Panthers, he broke his sternum last year in the finals, but still managed to play. Radko Gudas was another guy who was playing with a high ankle sprain for a large portion of the playoffs. And Aaron Ekblad, he also too was playing with a broken foot and 2 separated shoulders. They avoided blaming injuries on why they came up short last year, and instead focused on preparing themselves to get back to the final. Players came back in better shape and hungrier to make another run. These guys showed up early to off-season workouts, and that set the pace for the entire season. The Oilers had their fair share of adversity, and they used that as an opportunity to come together. They were ranked second to last in the league. They were 31st within the first month of the season. Having the head coach fired, scrambling to get everyone in sync, and rebounding to make the playoffs and into the Cup Final, taking it to 7 games, with many of their top players also playing through injuries. But they also avoided going down that rabbit hole of saying they're hurt, that's why they came up short. Both teams were focused on what can be done instead of what can't be done. One of the really interesting things about the Edmonton Oilers is that they work with George Mumford, who is a world-renowned sports psychologist, to take the team to another level. George Mumford has worked with Phil Jackson, the head coach of the Chicago Bulls during their championship run in the 90s. He worked with Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. And a big thing he helped them with was getting into the flow of their team so everyone can excel. George Mumford saw that Connor had many similarities to Michael in that they're the best in their sport, mastered all the fundamentals, but they're on a quest with their teammates. When you play with others, everyone is going to be on different levels in how well they perform. And for Connor and Michael, their teammates are trying to keep up with them, and when they don't, it can be frustrating for them. So to overcome this, instead of being their best individually, Connor and Michael need to be their best for their teammates, to set their teammates up for success. And many times it requires being patient until they get into a rhythm. And when they do, it can be the difference in winning and losing, because now everything is not so heavily dependent on their star players. I remember the past few years I'd watched the Edmonton Oilers, and I eventually got a little tired of it because they relied too much on their star players like Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. And then their back end, their defense were susceptible. So they were constantly in games that were high scoring. But this year, they really turned it around and were more focused on the defense. George Mumford started working with the Oilers just after the head coach was fired in November, and found that the team was in a very fragile state. He kept reminding the players to avoid fixating on failures because it keeps them stuck. You got to keep moving towards your goal no matter what, and that requires letting go of mistakes. And all of this played out in the series that served the Oilers well. They made key mistakes in each of the first 3 games, but they were able to let it go. How simple is the concept of moving on from what went wrong and resetting so you can rebound from it? As Game 7 ended, McDavid was hunched over on the bench, looking completely drained, giving everything he had. And as his teammates were coming off the ice, he's there encouraging, thanking, and congratulating them for such a wonderful run. What a moment that was, to be able to see things outside of yourself and how you affect others. This is going to go a long way in the team's journey going forward. That image will always resonate with me a lot more because it speaks volume to a disappointing moment. To have the composure and look outside yourself, to look to your teammates and uplift them. I was happy for the Panthers winning it, but I felt underwhelmed. Underwhelmed that it was over. The greatest joy was watching the entire process and the impressive response by each side, just maintaining that composure. Let's use this to remind us to truly believe in ourselves, even when things look bleak. We got to let go of mistakes, learn from them, and keep moving towards our goals. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're interested in more topics like this, become a Thriving Minds member at www.thrivingminds.live. It's your personal development resource so you can build that right mindset and live to thrive. All right, until next time.